be us, so that even if we weren't on the land, we still carried its wisdom with us, unlike the Nile, which you could carry nothing unless you were actually in the Nile.
Hello, Rabbi.
Good evening, Natan.
Did you receive my text with a suggestion for the next Masechet?
I did. I haven't had a chance to look through, but for those that were wondering, Natan has suggested that after we finish Gittin, which we might do tonight, we would move on to Beitzah. If you're interested in that, let me know. If you're not interested and want something different, now is the time to speak up. So I will review whatever suggestions we get and make a determination. All right. I think that puts everything in motion. So what's that?
The Beitzah was about the minor holidays?
I mean, that's one way of looking at it. Like all the Masechtot, it has a variety of topics. But really picking the next Masechet is better for offline discussion rather than online discussion. So let's go ahead. It's 7:02. I think we are okay to go ahead and get started. We are in chapter 9, Mishnah number 4. Everybody with me?
1 second. Chapter
Yes.
9, Mishnah 4. Yep.
All right. So we are going to be starting off here with a topic which may seem a little unusual. So let's break down the normal circumstance. Normally, the man gets the get written, the get is witnessed, the get is the man gets the get written, the get is witnessed, the get is delivered, and the woman becomes divorced. The woman then remarries a different man, and they have children, and everything is fine. Okay? That's the normal version. The wrong version is the get wasn't really a get. You know, the man just said you're divorced, but he never gave her a get, or some other major infraction took place. Maybe nothing was done at all, and she just ran off by herself. She marries another man. They have children. Those children are what are called mamzerim. A mamzer is a special category in Torah of children that are born from illicit, prohibited, categorically prohibited relationships. We talked a little bit about some debate on that, but that's the basic idea. And adultery is one of the big ones.
I'm sorry. And what happened if it's the woman that refused to the get? The men want the get. I know that we learn that it's up to the men. But what happens if really the woman doesn't want the get?
So in the Talmud, it goes into more detail of what the Torah means. The Torah says that the man writes the get and sends her away. And that's why the man has to be the initiate for the get procedure. The initiator, I guess, is the better English. If the woman refuses to receive the get, then a special Beit Din session can be convened to receive the get on her behalf, even in her absence, and even over her objection. Now, it may sound a little paternalistic, but the logic behind that is that the court has the right to act on behalf of another person for their benefit, to help them. And since being properly divorced is in everybody's best interest, both the husband and the wife, the court is willing to accept the get into their hands and to then render it as being accomplished. And the woman would then be considered divorced, and so would the husband.
So now, that's during the time of the Mishnah. What happened today? Halacha L'Maaseh, what happened?
The same. We still will convene a special court if necessary, if the woman refuses to participate in the get delivery process at all. Now, that's not something that I've participated in personally, because I've been able to always be with situations where the woman, even if she was reluctant, was able to be convinced to come for the 5-10 minutes it takes to receive the get and to make life simple. And partly that's because it technically can be done without you. So if it's going to be done one way or the other, you might as well participate, get it over with, and have your say in the process. But the conservative movement and other Batei Din, other courts, will convene if necessary to accept a get on behalf of the woman in her absence if she is absolutely adamant that she will not participate. The same way, as I talked about a couple different times, both in the Talmudic discussion, but then in practice in the conservative movement, if the husband refuses to give a get, even though there is already a civil divorce, which shows that there is a dissolution of the marriage, then the conservative movement will convene a special court to annul the original marriage, to uproot the kiddushin, as it's called, and to allow both him and her to remarry without fear of it being considered adultery. Now, 9.4 is going to deal with the border cases, right? Obviously, if you do it wrong, it's not really a divorce, and any subsequent children, it's basically adultery. And by the way, I guess I shouldn't say by the way, I should have said this at the beginning, or at least near the beginning. The use of the term the child is fit or the child is not fit, meaning it's a mamzer or not a mamzer, or rather fit means not a mamzer and not fit means is a mamzer. It's not about the child per se. It is a technical term showing that in every way, shape, and form, the husband and wife are still married, and thus the child status is now damaged. It's the same way in earlier Masechtot, we often talk about, can she eat truma? It's not that every woman is married to a priest or that truma is the only food. It is a legal benchmark of if this, then we know we are 100% okay, or if not, we know we're 100% not okay. So it's a technical category more than looking to besmirch the children of the relationship.
Do we still have issues with the mamzerim today?
Yes and no. For most of the last 2,000 years, including in the time of the Mishnah and especially in the time of the Talmud, but then also with the Rishonim and the Achronim, the later halachic poskim, the teachers, great lengths have been gone to remove the threat of mamzerim, to diminish the number of children who might be categorized as a mamzer. And in the modern world, usually extenuating circumstances up to and including questionable interpretations of how long a child might gestate in order to, give the husband a chance to be considered to be the father rather than an adulterer, are used in both conservative and Orthodox communities to try and avoid labeling children as mamzerim, because it is a big problem. Now, the ceremony I mentioned before, the hafka'at kiddushin, the uprooting of kiddushin, is also effective, if necessary, to avoid mamzerim. Because if the first marriage was invalid, if it was annulled, then any children born from a second marriage would not be considered adultery. They would just be considered children born out of wedlock. And children born out of wedlock are not mamzerim. Very important. Hold on to that idea. People get it confused all the time because in English, we often say the word mamzer means bastard, and it's not the same thing.
So if there's a mistake in the chuppah at the time of the kiddushin, okay, nisuim, and there's a mistake that they discover that the tuvah is incorrect, everything like that. So the kids from that wedding are not mamzerim today.
Correct. They are not mamzerim. If you go to your
also for the Orthodox world, not only for the conservative.
Oh yeah. That's all the way back d'oraita, right? That's not like some liberal new interpretation. That is halakha, all the way back. So let's take worst case scenario. A man and a woman want to get married, and they don't belong to a synagogue, so they look in the newspaper or in Google to try and find a rabbi to get them to do a wedding for them. And they get some guy, they pay him whatever, and they find out 10 years later, after they've already had 2 kids, that not only is he not a rabbi, but he's actually a messianic person, he's Christian, and he deliberately added like Jesus's name into the blessings, totally ruined the ketubah. Nothing about their wedding was according to halakha, never had the proper formulas being used, nothing. The children are still not mamzerim. That's, they should take him to court, but for misrepresentation, but the children are not mamzerim. That they do not fall into that category. The only way you can have a mamzer is if the 2 people who are having the relationship could never, under any circumstances, be married under a valid, by any definition, relationship. So the 2 big categories are incest and adultery. Those are the 2 big ways that you could create a mamzer. But again, the Rabbanim in the Mishnah and the Talmud and later generations really try to avoid that. And remember, they weren't talking about DNA tests or what color are his eyes or anything like that. They were saying, well, is it at all possible that the husband might have slept with her, even if she was normally not sleeping with him, but with some lover? Was there one time in the last 9 months where they were even alone together? Then maybe it's really his, and that means that it's not a mamzer. So the rabbis will, say that even a 12-pound baby might be premature because the husband was with her only 5 months ago, and that means that it's not a mamzer, or that really the gestation took much longer because this baby came 10 months or 11 months after the last time the husband was with his wife, and therefore the child's not a mamzer. The halakha really does try to prevent that category. And like I said, in the conservative movement, we always have the option of hafka'at kiddushin, of annulling the marriage in order to avoid. In fact, sorry if I'm going on too long on this topic, but it was one of the very interesting sections that we did in Talmud with a lot of both ancient and practical application. There in the Tosafot on the page where the rabbis are talking about the annulment process, in the Tosafot they even bring up the question that if you can annul any marriage, then that means you would never have the case of mamzerim, because you could always prevent it simply by annulling. So this idea, this possibility was known at least 1,000 years ago in the analysis of the Tosafot, a little bit less than 1,000 years ago. But this is definitely showing you the lengths that our tradition has gone to try and avoid applying this category to any child. But here in this Mishnah, it's not about the child in particular. It is about how divorced is she. If she's only kind of divorced, then it's a problem. If she's 100% divorced, no problem. If she's 100% still married, then it's very clear and we got a problem. But what about in the gray territory? Before we get into that, Aaron, I see that you've had your hand up very patiently.
Yeah, Rabbi, I had a quick question. Didn't Rabbi Ovadia Yosef set forth a standard that they said was very difficult to meet in declaring someone a mamzer?
I'm actually not familiar with his teachings on that topic.
So
the question from Aaron was, didn't Rav Ovadia Yosef have a standard for describing, for determining if someone was a mamzer that was very, very, well, you might call it lenient or very strict, meaning that it's very hard to find anybody that would actually meet the criteria of being a mamzer. I don't know that personally because I haven't studied his teachings on that topic, but it wouldn't surprise me. Although he was very, dare I say, right-wing in many of his political and social views, when it came to halakha, in many ways, he was very lenient, much more so than you might imagine. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was his opinion, that it was indeed, following from our tradition, very hard to find a child that would fit the criteria and be classified as a mamzer. But I can't say that with my own eyes because I haven't read his teachings on that topic.
And Rabbi, one more thing. Does it matter how much the rabbi messes up on a wedding? Because I thought once they have relations with each other, that would cure any defect?
So this gets into a question of, are you looking for a loophole or are you not looking for a loophole? Or maybe escape hatch might be the better definition. So if you need to dissolve the marriage without a child being rendered a mamzer, for example, then saying that the marriage was done incorrectly, and thus even later intimacy, as evidenced by the child, was not done for the purpose of kiddushin, for marriage, but was instead just frivolous intimacy. Bia znut is the term that's used in the text, meaning they were just fooling around. Then you can call it that. So yes, the rabbis have on the other side, as an escape hatch, that even if the wedding went wrong, but they wanted to be married, then we assume that their intimacy was the ratification of a marriage intention. But it really depends on what you are hoping to accomplish in your ruling. If you want the family to be truly married, then you would say, yes, okay, fine. Maybe somebody mispronounced a word or there was some other error in the ketubah, but they're still married. It's okay, because clearly they were trying to get married and their intimacy was enough. On the other hand, if you really want to undo the marriage, again, for mamzerim, for example, then finding a flaw becomes a very handy hook to dissolve that marriage and render the marriage null and void. It's not a one size fits all. It's a one size will fit all if you are trying to apply the law as needed for that particular case. So as we've talked about before, you and I, halakha lamase really cannot be reduced to an algorithm. And when the rabbis say that the Jewish men do not engage in frivolous sex, and thus any sex is considered tantamount to marriage, they also say on other pages, except in the cases where we need to treat it like it was just frivolous, because we're trying to avoid something else. And which are those cases? Well, that's going to be handled case by case. All right, so here in 9.4, there are 3 Gittin, meaning 3 types of divorce documents, which are invalid, meaning they're not actually correct. But if a woman marries on the strength of one of them, the child is fit, meaning is not a mamzer. So what we are saying here is what's known as b'dei avad and lehatchila. Lehatchila means that if you ask me, is this get a kosher get? Is this a valid get? I will tell you no, and you shouldn't use it to get married. But b'dei avad, you come to me and say, oh, I got married, but this was my get. And I look at it and go, oh, and there's one of these 3 problems on it. You are actually divorced, and the children that you have from your second marriage are not considered mamzerim. That's b'dei avad. After the fact, it's technically okay, but lehatchila, before the fact, this is not the way it should be done. And this is a common pair of ideas that happen in Jewish law in many, many places, where we have this is the way it should be done, and if you notice it not being done this way before it happens, stop it and fix it. But if it was done and you only notice after the fact, it is still okay. So lehatchila, the right way to do it from the start, b'dei avad, it's still technically okay. If it happened and you only discovered afterwards, it is fine. So these are b'dei avad, valid. These gets are okay. They did actually accomplish the divorce, and thus any children afterwards, which is the ultimate test, are kosher and not mamzerim. And what are the 3 cases? 1, if the husband wrote it with his own hand, but there are no witnesses on it. So we've generally been talking about the husband going to a scribe, a sofer, to have the get written. But here, the husband actually wrote it himself, but crucially, he didn't have anybody witness it. there are no signatures of witnesses on the get. Now, generally, you need witnesses. 2 witnesses is kind of like a big rule in Judaism, except when it isn't. And this is one of those exceptions, because his hand, meaning his handwriting, is what is testifying for him on this case. The reason why there are witnesses on a get is to protect the husband so that he can't say, I never gave the get, but instead there will be, and she cannot thus create a fake get and say, my husband divorced me, I'm going to go get married. But if it's in his handwriting, then we can compare it to other things that he wrote, and that will become sufficient. That is testimony enough to know that indeed it was valid. Now, you shouldn't do it that way. The husband should, if he wants to write it himself, okay, as long as it is precisely done, and there need to be witnesses as well, and they need to sign it. It should be done without this issue. But if he wrote it and he gave it to her, and then she went and got married on it, and then turns out that it was written just by him with no witnesses later, the children from that second marriage are okay. She really was divorced. She's in the clear. All right, problem get number 2. If there are witnesses on it, but no date. So again, we really want a date on the get. And if anybody tries to submit a get and it's noticed, tries to submit a get and it's noticed there is no date, then we have to redo it and make sure the date is put on. But if the get were delivered and there were witnesses to the get itself, meaning on it, so it's a kosher get in every other way, but then it's later discovered that there was no date on it, the get itself is still valid. And thus she is really divorced and her children are fine from the second marriage. And then problem number 3, if it has a date, but only one witness. Again, it is a impaired get because it doesn't have the 2 witnesses on it that we normally require. But in every other way, it is a sufficient, an adequate get. And in the case here, we would absolutely stop it before it gets delivered. But once it was delivered and she is remarried, then we say, no, she has married based on this get. It is sufficient. She really was divorced. The children are fine. And the quick summary, these are the 3 Gittin, which are invalid. But if a woman marries on the strength of one of them, the child is fit. So it's a bookend. These are 3, 1, 2, 3. These are 3, a common mnemonic form that is used for the Mishnah. Any questions on that before we get Rabbi Elazar's opinion? All right, Rabbi Elazar says, even though there are no witnesses on it, as long as he gave it to her in the presence of witnesses, it is valid. And on the strength of it, she may collect her ketubah, even from mortgage property, since witnesses only sign on the get because of tikkun olam. So Rabbi Elazar is pointing out that the signatures technically was there to avoid strife and problems. And so if it was given without that, technically it would still be valid because the signatories were only added as a later requirement. And thus it is an adequate get to say that she has been divorced. And here he uses the other measure of, is it really a divorce and is it really a get? And that is, can she actually use it to collect her ketubah, even from mortgage property, which is like the highest level of status when you are a creditor.
Did he win the case in the day? Did he take the day?
Just a second. Did he win? You know what? I have to go back and double check that. That's one of those details that I don't remember of whether or not Rabbi Elazar, because sometimes he gives an addition that was added. And well, tell you what, let's see if Rabbi Kolp mentions it. Sometimes he brings the point as well.
Because it makes a lot of sense for me.
Oh, it certainly makes sense. Yes. No, I don't see Rabbi Elazar being discussed of whether he won or not in that. So we would have to go look in the Gemara or in the Halakha to find out. But I cannot tell you off the top of my head. Sorry. All right, moving on then to Mishnah 9:5.
You are lucky that we are almost in a lul, so I can.
We're almost. Thank you. I appreciate your forgiveness. The memory is not what it used to be. All right. So Mishnah 9:5. We're now going to get into what I would call the sitcom version of the get. So this is, it's not impossible, but it's a little absurd. We have two guys who have the same name, and they are married each to their own wife, and the wives have the same name. And all of the other distinguishing characteristics would also be the same. So you literally have two identical gets. Each person has a get written from him to her, and they are identical. There is nothing that you can find in the get that is different between one or the other. Okay, that's the setup. And of course, if you're familiar with a comedy movie, you know, once you find out you got two that are identical, something's going to happen. Two men sent two identical Gittin to their wives. Again, identical means same husband name, same wife name, all other distinguishing features the same. And they became mixed up, right? So what happens here is the agent who is taking it puts both of them in his bag, and they're not labeled or anything. And he pulls them out, and now he can't remember which one was from Mr. Cohen 1 and which one was from Mr. Cohen 2. And there's no way for him to tell, right? He can open it up, look at it. There's nothing that can distinguish between the two gets. What do you do? Well, they give both of them to this wife and both of them to this wife. So they get one wife together and they say, behold, here is your get. And then they take it back and they give her another one and say, behold, here is your get. And then they take the two gets and they go to the second wife and they say, behold, here is your get. And then behold, here is your get with the second one. And mission accomplished. Both women are divorced because we know that one of the two gets was for one of the wives, and one of the two gets was for the other wife. So if we give the get to both of them, then when we said this is your get to the wife for whom that wasn't the one that her husband had sent, we didn't do anything. We just said words. And then when we hand her the second get, which is from her actual husband, and say this is your get, that actually has the legal ramification. And likewise for the second wife, the other wife, when we give her the first get, that really was her get. And so she's divorced by it. And when we give her the second get, which technically belonged to the other woman, we just said words. It was like being in a play. Nothing actually happens, and it doesn't undo anything. I could take any get that was out there and hand it to a random woman and say, this is your get. And I haven't done anything. I don't have to worry about what names are on them. It's the get only matters if it is from the husband to the wife in particular. It doesn't matter anything else about it. Well, it has to be done correctly, as we've seen, but I can't just buy a ready-made get with the right names on it. It has to be from him to her. And if it's not, then it doesn't hurt anyone to say this is your get. Aaron, you got your hand up?
Yes, Rabbi. Just out of curiosity, I always thought you had to actually give the get to the wife, as in transfer it to her, like she would then take possession of it.
Well, yes, but it's only hers if it's hers.
But even though you're giving her both of them, you're taking both of them back. I didn't think you could take the get back after you gave it to her.
You are taking back the one that isn't hers, and you are borrowing unknowingly the one that is hers. And then when you give it to the other woman, you can't actually give it to her because it isn't hers. And then when you give her the one that is correctly the other woman's, it is hers. So it's, like in basketball, no harm, no foul. You're not stealing anything because the other woman knows that she has to participate in this, or neither of them get divorced. And you're not making a claim that is binding about who the get belongs to. That's sorted out by the kavanah, by the intention of the original writer, meaning the husband. So both women end up receiving the get that rightfully belongs to each of them. We don't know which one it is, but we know it happened because one of them rightfully belonged to each of them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess. I just thought they had the right to keep the get just for like a receipt.
Well, the get would be kept kind of as a receipt, but remember the get is given back and then the wife is given a receipt. And likewise, the husband is given a receipt when the ketubah is paid. So other forms of receipt are then held. But this doesn't have to mean like, a month later we do it. We can have both women in the same room and take care of it all at the same time. But we would then write a receipt saying, indeed, the get was delivered, the woman was divorced, and she is now free to marry anyone.
Right. I thought that receipt came later on, so you couldn't challenge the get.
Yes and no. But in general, there was also became very quickly adopted to provide that additional evidence. However, therefore, if one of them was lost, meaning one get was missing, the other is void. So if the traveler, the agent realizes that there was a hole in his bag, and now he only has one get left, but two women, well, he can't give the get to both of them because we don't actually know who it belongs to. And then we would not actually be able to give it to the right woman because we wouldn't know which one was it, and we wouldn't know who was then divorced. And since we couldn't know who was divorced, we just cancel the other get, both of them really, and we start over again. But here, for whatever reason, hello, did the connection go down? Can you still hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. I just got a preparing to live stream button pop up, but
I can hear you.
okay, then I'll keep going, and whatever's happening with YouTube is YouTube's problem. All right. So for whatever reason, we have a group of men, like 5, that decide they want to write one big get. And each one of them will be mentioned in the get, and each one of them will mention their wife in the get. So it's going to say, Mr. 1 divorces Mrs. 1. Mr. 2 divorces Mrs. 2. And it's just one big get.
So they try to save money.
Apparently for the witnesses, I guess, or maybe they only had one big piece of paper. I don't know. It's, again, oftentimes the Mishnah's special circumstances are not here to tell us what's likely, but to help tease out some element of the law. So fine, they only had one giant piece of paper and they only had 2 witnesses that were there to sign for all of them. All right, what do? Well, all are valid. And the get is to be given to each of the women. So you take the get, you give it to Mrs. 1, and then she's divorced. You take the get, you give it to Mrs. 2, and she's divorced, and on and on and on. And it is considered kosher for all of them. But it has to actually be delivered to each of the women for each of the husbands. Yes.
I thought that the people need to keep the kosher, the get.
Right. So
like when
in general,
they give you need to keep as a document.
So in general, that was the custom, but it isn't a requirement. It's just a good idea. And this is also why we have the process of writing a tu'udah that goes along as a receipt, so that each woman would have it. And of course, now we remove the get from circulation, so that nobody can be, no one can ask about the get later on, that we don't challenge the get later.
So the husband also receives a receipt, or only the woman?
The husband receives a receipt when he pays the ketubah. Now, in the modern world, both husband and wife receive a receipt. But in the ancient world, each would receive a receipt for her for the divorce and him for the ketubah. That way he could prove that he had divorced her because he paid the ketubah, and she could prove she was divorced because she had the receipt for the get.
That's today and in the past.
Well, today we give a receipt to both of them, since most people don't collect on the ketubah but waive the right, and it's done through the civil courts. Both husband and wife get a tu'udah that says that they were divorced.
So today you can also, if that's the process, you can also have the get before the civil divorce, correct?
Technically, yes, but at least the Masada that I work with, the one who writes the get, and every other one that I know of as standard in the conservative movement, will not do the get or will not make the get available until the civil divorce has been finalized.
Wow.
But just in case the husband and wife reconcile, they decide not to complete the divorce, they want to leave that. Now, you can begin the commissioning of the get prior to the divorce. So, if two people are getting a divorce, but it's not finalized, they can go ahead and we can get the sofer writing and get it ready. And then once the civil divorce is done, so that we know there's no going back, the get can be immediately delivered.
But the tekes, the ceremony, you do only after?
In the conservative movement, yes. Now, technically, it could be done earlier.
Technically, early, technically.
Technically, yes. Technically, the civil divorce has no legal standing in Jewish law. But as a matter of best practice, of avoiding too many problems and of trying to maintain a similar status, that you're not divorced but still going through the court cases, we wait until the civil divorce has happened, until the delivery part of the get.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think, would there be a situation where it would be necessary, like maybe the wife was going to move to another country, and the only way to give her the get would be to do it before the civil divorce was finalized. And if you didn't do it now, you would maybe never get it done. Then yes, since it's kosher to give the get because the civil divorce doesn't have any legal standing before that, then yes, I might be able to see a circumstance where that would happen. But in general, I've never come across a case where we give the get before the civil divorce is finalized.
Well, maybe we'll be one very soon.
You never know. You never know. That's the thing. It's in halakha, you have every possible human relationship and every possible variation. So you do never know what kind of situation will come up. It's why the family law writings in the writings of the poskim throughout the Middle Ages are so common, because you end up with strange situations, and often it does involve travel or other things. Okay, last bit of Mishnah 5. If the scribe wrote out the formula for each one and the witnesses signed below, only the one with which the signatures are read is valid. Okay, so what we're talking about here is at the bottom of the page, that the formula was written out for each one, but there are signatures only below one of the formulas. What that would mean would be like a paragraph that says, Mr. 1 is divorcing Mrs. 2, blah, 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 blah. A paragraph, Mr. 2 is divorcing Mrs. 2. Paragraph, all the details. Paragraph, Mr. 3, blah, blah, blah. And then at the very bottom, we have the signatures of the witnesses. Well, technically, those signatures are only attached to the bottom paragraph. And so only the bottom paragraph is a valid get. Mr. 1 and 2, in my example, would not be able to use that get as a valid get because the signatures are not attached to their part of the get. So just to make sure we understand, in our middle section, the part back here where we had 5 guys on the same get, they were each all part of the same paragraph. Mr. A, Mrs. A, Mr. B, Mrs. B. And then the formula was for all of them as one block. But in the next part, it's one block per person, even though they're on the same sheet, even though the signatures are on the same page, the signatures could appear to be only referring to the final bottom paragraph. So the previous paragraphs are not kosher and cannot be used as a get. All right, Mishnah 9:6. So now we're going to deal with, again, one big piece of paper, 2 gets, but now we are doing columns. So we have get number 1 on the right-hand side, and then get number 2 on the left-hand side. What happens? I know, it's like I said, you never know what's going to come before you when you're the rabbi. Nowadays, we've got a little bit more homogeneity. The writing is the formula is so carefully done, we don't have these problems. But what happens?
Sorry, Rabbi. So the previous example, yes, you can do. You can give to each woman and they return the get.
No.
The paper.
If it's paragraph,
Yes.
only the final paragraph is kosher.
So you cannot do that. Bottom line.
Correct.
You can't.
Right. Only the final one is kosher. All right. If 2 Gittin are written on the same sheet, side by side, and the signatures of the 2 witnesses in Hebrew stretch from under one to the other, so the signatures actually go underneath both columns, and then signatures of 2 witnesses in Greek stretch from under one to get under the other, the one with which the first 2 signatures are read is valid. So we have the issue here that Hebrew goes from right to left.
Mm-hmm.
So the name is going to be underneath the Hebrew side. And that means that if those were the 2 first signatures, that would be the valid get on the right-hand side, right? Because that's where their names are. Because the rest of their name is going to be under the left-hand get. Because, you know, we have like the full name, Harav Yehoshua Micha, Ben, that's my name, Ben, Avraham Verut, those are my parents' names. Those parts are not actually my name. They're my identifier, but my name is Harav Yehoshua Micha. So that's the core. And the right hand is where it gets started. That's where my name is. Therefore, the right-hand get is the get that is kosher. Even if my name stretches partly under the left, it's not 100% clear. Now, Greek witnesses, if they went first, meaning if they were above the Hebrew witnesses, because Greek starts on the left-hand side, well, then the left-hand side column get would be valid. So it matters which order the witnesses came in. On that same, go ahead, yeah.
Sorry, this is not a contradiction for the previous one because the logic is the last one. If the last one paragraph was the kosher one, here is the same, should be the last one, meaning on the left side, because you write in Hebrew from right to left. So the last one should be the same, no?
But you're making a sandwich, right? So you want the paragraph that's closest to the witnesses that are closest.
Okay. So the signature, the important signature are the witnesses, not yours. No,
Yeah. The husband doesn't sign the get. The witnesses sign the get.
Okay.
Right. So whichever witnesses are closest to the actual paragraph that's relevant, That's where we get the touch, right? That's the smichut, the juxtaposition. It's easier to do it like this, but it's really like that. All right, same theme, different problem. If there is one signature in Hebrew and one in Greek, and then another signature in Hebrew and a signature in Greek, so now they are like that's really bad with the camera. They're interwoven, right? So you go Hebrew, Greek, Hebrew, Greek. Then, and they're stretching again underneath these two columns. Both are invalid. Nobody's getting divorced with that monstrosity, right? Because you have a Hebrew one going from the right and then a Greek one from the left and then a Hebrew one from the right and a Greek from the left. Well, the two that are closest to the get can't agree on who they're under. One of them looks like it's under the right. One of them looks like it's under the left. So they can't join. And because they can't join, the other signatures don't matter either. So it's because it's the other signature is blocked by the ones above it. So we can't tell which signature was supposed to be for what. So do it again. Write a new get. And use a separate sheet of paper, for crying out loud. All right. 9-7. Right. If he left over some of the get from the first sheet and he wrote the rest of the get on the next column. So we're actually like wrapping over the get. It's not all on just one page. And the witnesses sign below the get, or sign below that, the get is valid, right? Even though he had to turn over the page and begin to write it on that right-hand column, that other side, he didn't have the room, but it is a continuation. As long as the signatures are clearly indicating to the continuation of the earlier part, then that is okay. So it's like, like word wrap in a document. That's okay. That second column is still considered part of the first column because it's the continuation. Next part. If the witnesses have signed at the top of the sheet or at the side or on the back of a simple get, remember, not the ones where it's not folded, then it's not valid, right? Because it's not clear that what they were signing was necessarily the get. This could have been a piece of paper where somebody erased all of the other ink and they are pretending that these people were witnesses and this is a forgery. So the signatures have to be in the right place, directly below, exactly below where the get was written. And that way we know they were witnessing this get. And there are other things we do in the modern world of symbols and signs to make sure that indeed the get that you have is the right get. But that's the essence of what's happening here, is we have to be sure that what they signed was this get, not some other forgery or other document. And if it was just at the top, who knows what was written below it? They could have signed first and then walked out of the room. And same thing if it was on the sign, and all the more so if it's on the back. I mean, it could have been a completely different document and someone took it and erased, scraped off the ink, and then wrote a fake get on the other side. And now we don't have a real get. So like I've said a couple of times throughout the class, we want to avoid forgeries, and this is one of it. All right, next part. If he connected the top of one get to the top of another get, and the witnesses' signatures are between the two, both of them are invalid. So here we've got two gets, one at the top, one at the bottom, and he tried to squeeze the signatures in between in order to imply that the signatures are good for the top one and the bottom one. But that doesn't really work, right? Because it is making it look like there is a it's making it look like the signatures don't line up with the bottom of really either of them, because of the way that this has now been the way the two top of them meet. It's The example that's given here in Culp is like, imagine somebody wrote the get and then turned the paper upside down and wrote another get and then wrote the signatures in between them. Well, the signature is kind of at the top of both of them. And even though, depending upon how you're rotating it, it's underneath one of them, it's not really. So not valid. Again, don't do this. Next part. If the end of one is connected to the end of the other, and the witnesses' signatures are between, the one with which the witnesses' signatures reads is valid. So here we have top, signatures, bottom, both going in the same direction, right? Not top to top, but top to bottom. Then in this case, the signatures that are underneath that first paragraph do validate the first paragraph, but they don't validate the bottom one. So you've got one get, but not two. Again, don't do this. And last part. Sorry, come on. If the top of one is connected to the bottom of the other and the witnesses' signatures are in the middle, the one with the witnesses' signatures reads is valid. Again, if the witnesses are connected to one of them, then that one is technically okay, but it's not the other one. It's not connected. It's in the wrong spot. It's invalid. All right. I'm going to see here. So close. All right, let's push on. But well, I may have to cut short a little discussion just to make sure we can finish up tonight. A get which was written in Hebrew and whose signatures are in Greek, or was written in Greek and whose signatures are in Hebrew. And yes, technically you could in the past do other languages. Now, to avoid confusion, we only use Hebrew. Or one which has Hebrew signatures and one Hebrew signature and one Greek signature, or which was written by a scribe and signed by one witness, is valid. So in all of these cases, you might think that because the language is different, maybe they weren't actually signing what they didn't actually know what they were signing. Or that, maybe because the signatures are different, they didn't know what they were doing. But no, we do consider it valid if everything else is correct. Likewise, it was written by a scribe and signed by one witness. Well, technically, the scribe can count as a witness. It's not the normal practice, but if it's that or not get the divorce done properly, we will accept the scribe as a witness, and the actual witness whose signature is at the bottom is also a witness, and that will be sufficient. If a man signs so-and-so, witness, right, Plony ben Plony, aid, it is valid. If he signs son of so-and-so, witness, it is valid. If he signs so-and-so, son of so-and-so, and he didn't write witness, it is valid. So normally we're supposed to write Plony ben Plony. Here we get all the variation, and then aid, witness. Here we get just the first name, but he wrote witness. Next time we get just the second name, but he wrote witness. And in the third case, he wrote first and last name, but left off the word witness. Technically, it is all correct. Again, not the way we normally do it, but it is still a signature. It is still valid. Even if the name wasn't the normal style of name, even if the normal witness wasn't appended to it. If he wrote his own family name and hers, the get is valid. And this is how the scrupulous in Jerusalem would do it. So as it says, usually the scribe would write the husband and wife's personal name, but if they wrote the family names, which is like the other references that the person might have, like nicknames, then that is considered okay. And indeed, in the modern world, we make sure to gather any nicknames and include them in the get. So if someone has a bunch of nicknames, like, somebody is called Robert, but he's also called Bob, but he's also called the Duke, in his poker group, then all of those names would appear in the get, along with his actual legal name. And then 5, the last part of this, a get given imposed by a court. In the case of a Jewish court, it is valid. In the case of a Gentile court, it is invalid. And with regard to Gentiles, if they beat him and say to him, do what the Israelites say to you, it is valid. All right. You have a man, and this man is a terrible husband. He doesn't feed his wife. He beats her. He cheats on her. He is a terrible person. Those are grounds for divorce. And the wife can go to the Beit Din and say, make him divorce me. But he refuses. I'm never going to divorce her. Well, if the court then has a conversation with him and they convince him that he should divorce her, even though they are forcing him to do it, it is still valid. If the conversation becomes a bit of extortion, divorce your wife or we will cut off all business with you, it is still valid. If the court decides to escalate to physical violence, literally beating him until he says, okay, I'll write the get is valid. He still has to say, write the get, but how he gets to that change of mind can get rough. That is the way that Jewish law protects, at least partially, the right for a woman to be divorced from somebody who really ought to be divorcing her. Yes, Natan.
What about going to continue with your process? Right, sign the get or we kill you. Is that valid?
So if you threaten, but he still says, okay, I want to make a get, yes, it is technically valid. Now, could they murder him? No, that would not be legal. But could they threaten it? Yes, they could threaten all sorts of things. I had a professor who said that even in the US, when he was younger, they used to have what they called the Muncie bus, which was, up in New Jersey, where if there was a husband that was refusing to give a get that the court had ordered him to give, they would take him for a little ride, like the mafia. And they'd beat him up, they'd rough him up until they got to the other end and he'd walk out and he'd say, give her a get, and the matter would be finished. Now, if the non-Jewish court attacks him, roughs him up, tries to force him to give a get, and he does, the get still isn't valid. She's still divorced. This is why this is why a divorce in an American court doesn't count for a Jewish divorce, because it's not a Jewish court. And even though the court in American law forced him to give her a divorce, it's not adequate in the eyes of Judaism. He has to do it according to Jewish means. If the non-Jewish court told him, do what the Jewish court says, that technically is valid, because they're not forcing him. They are forcing him to listen to the Jewish court, and the Jewish court has that authority. All right, I wish we had more time for that topic, because it is a very important one, because we do not have the power to force men to divorce their wives the way we used to. I cannot take somebody and beat them up until they give a proper divorce. And that's one of the reasons why we have the Hafka'at Kiddushin, the uprooting of the Kiddushin, the annulment system, in order to take care of this problem. For most of our history, we didn't need to annul marriages because we could always convince the husband, one way or another, to give a divorce. But in the modern world, with civil laws and civil protections, we don't have that authority. And we don't have the social structure to even make his life difficult without if he doesn't do what the court orders. And so we need another tool. And that's why we've gone back into the tool chest the Talmud discusses and use this in these extraordinary circumstances. All right, we're almost there. We're going to push on. I've got a few more minutes if you do. Now we're going to talk a little bit about gossip. And apparently gossip can be legally useful. If a report goes out in the town a certain woman is betrothed. She is regarded as betrothed. So if people start saying, oh, did you hear that Miss so-and-so is getting married? She's been betrothed. She's going to get married next year with, the chuppah and all of that, but she got the ring, blah, blah, blah. Then she should be treated as though she were betrothed. That is considered to be enough to create an assumption. Now, as Kolp points out, the Talmud says we do need some other things to go with this. I can't just go and start whispering around town that Mrs. So-and-so or Miss So-and-so is going to get married. She needs to start preparing. She needs to be going around celebrating the process. There needs to be some physical evidence to match the rumors. It can't just be a rumor. Otherwise, things would get messy really, really fast. Likewise, if a report goes out in the town, Miss So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so is now divorced, she is regarded as divorced. Again, there has to be some other evidence, some witnesses. Oh yeah, I saw when they did the delivery of the get. That is good enough. Now, you might be thinking, why should this matter? Can you really run a life off rumor? Well, the alternative would be that a woman who says that she's getting married would have to go around and tell everybody I'm getting married and show physical proof. That is impossible. But even worse, a woman who divorced, what is she going to do? Wear a big letter that says divorced, a big D on her chest so that people know she's divorced? Does she have to have her get stapled to her dress so everybody knows she's divorced? No. If there is enough evidence to back up the discussion and the talk, then it is enough to be considered that she is divorced or betrothed. This is only the case, however, provided the report has no qualifications, no stipulations. What is meant by a qualification? If the report is so-and-so divorced his wife with the stipulation, or he threw her the betrothal money, but it is uncertain whether it landed nearer to her or nearer to him, this is a qualification. And in both these cases, we would not act like she was divorced. We wouldn't act like she was married. We would wait and see what more evidence would come out. Because again, the idea that there was a betrothal or was a divorce, that's fine. But if there was any question mark about it, then we cannot work off that assumption unless we get a solid report that indeed that qualification was met. And the last Mishnah, which probably is the one that people might consider the most interesting, is talking about divorce. When are you allowed to do it? And Rabbi Kolp gives a very long introduction, which we're not going to read together, but we're going to get to the meat of the issue. Beit Shammai says a man should not divorce his wife unless he has found her guilty of some unseemly conduct. And in their case, they meant sexual immorality. As it says, because he found some unseemly thing with her. Ervat davar is a little vague. They are reading it to mean literally a nakedness issue. But Hillel says that he may divorce her even if she has merely burnt his dish, since it says, because he has found some unseemly thing in her. They are reading this in a more idiomatic way, a more general. It's distasteful. He doesn't like what she did. For him, it looks bad. He has found this. It's not nice. And that means that Beit Shammai did not want people to get divorced. Indeed, they would refuse to help a divorce if it wasn't for an actual sexual problem. And Beit Hillel would grant a divorce even if it was for a trivial issue like the style of cooking. Rabbi Akiva goes on to clarify and add, he may divorce her even if he finds another woman more beautiful than she is, meaning she didn't do anything wrong. She isn't worse than she was. But the rest of the verse that we got from chapter 24 is, and it comes to pass if she finds no favor in his eyes. Someone else now has favor in his eyes. She no longer has that preference, and he can divorce her even for those grounds. Now, That probably seems harsh. And I should point out, Beit Hillel and Rabbi Akiva win the day. In Judaism, you do not need to have a criminal action by the wife before the husband can divorce her. The husband can divorce a woman for any reason. And that may seem harsh, but the alternative is to force people to stay together that don't want to be together. And Judaism does not believe that that is the appropriate answer. Divorce should never be treated trivially. It shouldn't be a casual or frivolous activity. But if they want to get divorced, even if we think their reasons for getting divorced aren't good ones, we can't stop them from getting divorced. We must help them to, well, first help them with counseling and discussion, but if necessary, let them go. That they have made a decision to go their own ways, and we cannot force them to stay together according to Jewish law. As always, we try to help with reconciliation for any relationship, but especially for marriage. But if the time has come to leave, the time has come to leave. And so Beit Hillel and Rabbi Akiva, those are the opinions that continue. Now, many other religions, Christianity in particular, especially at the start, violently disagreed with that and believed that marriage was meant to be forever. How they reconcile chapter 24 with their opinion is a little bit tricky for me to understand, since the Torah clearly says that divorce is possible. But in Judaism, we believe there are times when divorce is the absolute correct action to take, and best for everybody involved, and best for the community. So there should be no stigma to divorce. It is not something that is, it's not something that should be shameful. It's not something to be embarrassed about. It is a necessity in some relationships, and one that we should be glad that God has made available to us through Torah and through Gittin to make sure that it can be done correctly and done in a way that leaves no lasting problems for the husband, the wife, or the children. To make the break clean and proper, we have rules laid out, and following them may seem difficult, but it is a good way to make sure that that break is done correctly. All right, I know I went over, I apologize. Are there any final questions or comments? All right, I will send out a note to those that are in the class regularly regarding our next Masechet once I've heard from anyone else or reviewed the options. But until then, I hope you review and think carefully about what we have studied. I always recommend going back and rereading from the beginning now that you have seen the end, because it gives you a better perspective. The second time through is always more helpful. But I will see you all next week.
That's your call, Rabbi. Thank
Take
you.
care, everyone.
We really need to do a Zoom party every time, really.
I agree. Now that we're opening up and we're doing our Kiddush luncheons and things, we definitely need to talk about ways we can formalize our celebration for finishing a Masechet.
Yeah, because it's a way to also celebrate and to share the joy with the rest of the community.
Absolutely. It's we can talk.